The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed at 2 a.m. A doctor, looking exhausted, told me my appendix was bursting. Emergency surgery. My hands were shaking, slick with a cold sweat as I texted my parents. Scott and Karen. Just 3 words. Hospital. Need surgery. Please. The pain was a white-hot spike, but the silence that followed was worse. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was my mother. Karen, we're in the middle of a webinar. Naomi, this is really bad timing. Can you call your Uncle Arthur? I read the text twice. Bad timing. My body was failing. And I was an inconvenience. I was 26 years old, staring at a text that told me exactly what I was worth. An interruption. I didn't cry. I didn't call back. Didn't beg. I just stared at that message. And a cold clarity, sharper than the pain, cut right through me. My anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I did exactly what my mother asked. I called my Uncle Arthur. The phone rang 3 times. His voice came through, groggy, but instantly alert. Naomi, are you okay? It's almost 3 in the morning. Uncle Arthur, I whispered, my throat dry. I'm at the hospital. I need surgery. Not a second of hesitation. No questions about timing. Just the rustle of sheets and the sound of keys being grabbed. I'm on my way. Which hospital? Send me the address. That was my first act of retaliation. It wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of replacement. When a nurse came in with a clipboard, I took a deep breath. Emergency contact, I said, my voice shaky but firm. I need to change it. Remove Scott and Karen. Put down Arthur. Only Arthur. My Uncle Arthur. A retired librarian with silver hair and eyes that always seemed to be smiling. Drove 40 miles in the middle of the night. He was the one who signed the consent forms for my surgery. And when I woke up in the hazy fog of anesthesia, the first person I saw wasn't my busy brand strategists. It was Uncle Arthur. Asleep in that uncomfortable plastic chair next to my bed. A paperback book still clutched in his hand. He lifted his head, blinked, and that warm smile spread across his face. Morning. Gitto. You did good. I spent the next 2 weeks recovering. Not at my parents' house, but at Uncle Arthur's. His home was the complete opposite of theirs. Where their house was a minimalist smart home, all glass, cold steel, and white surfaces that felt like an empty showroom, his was warm. It was cluttered. There were stacks of books in every corner, dusty shelves that smelled like old paper, and furniture that was actually comfortable. It felt real. It was the first time in my life I felt truly safe. And in that quiet, dusty guest room, with nothing to do but heal, I had a lot of time to think. That text message from the hospital, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was the logical climax of my entire life. For 26 years, I had been the invisible asset. I was the quiet, self-sufficient daughter. The freelance graphic designer they could brag about at their networking events. Oh, Naomi, she's so creative. Runs her own little business. They loved the idea of me. They just didn't have much use for the actual person. I remembered, clear as day, showing my mother, Karen, my first big contract with a national tech firm. She was in the middle of staging a photo for her lifestyle blog. She barely glanced up from arranging her marble coasters. That's nice. Honey, she'd said, her smile tight and camera ready. But it's so unstable, isn't it? You can't build a real brand on instability. My father, Scott, the financial advisor who was always advising other people, was just as bad. When I'd paid off my student loans 3 years early, He'd patted me on the head. Literally. A few good contracts are fine. Naomi, he'd said, his voice condescending. But you just don't understand the pressure of maintaining a real-world brand like ours. We have obligations. I was their obligation. The one they fulfilled with minimum effort. I was the accessory that was supposed to sit on the shelf and look good. Not the one that suddenly broke down and required maintenance at 2 a.m. That night in the hospital, they hadn't seen a daughter in crisis. They'd seen an inconvenient line item, a glitch in their perfectly curated schedule. Lying there, surrounded by Uncle Arthur's books. I realized the cold clarity I felt in the ER wasn't just the shock. It was acceptance. The problem wasn't that they had failed me in that one moment. The problem was that I had spent 26 years waiting for them to be people they simply were not. My parents, Scott and Karen, finally showed up 2 days later. Not at the hospital. They came to Uncle Arthur's house. They didn't bring flowers or grapes. They brought a leather portfolio. They stood in the doorway of that cozy, dusty living room, looking completely out of place in their expensive, sharp-angled clothing. My mother, Karen, gave a thin smile, her eyes darting around at the stacks of books as if they were offensive. Naomi, darling, she said, her voice bright and brittle. You look pale. We were so worried. My father, Scott. I just looked at his watch. We're glad you're recovering, sweetheart. But we really need to discuss something. It's time sensitive. They didn't ask how I felt. They didn't apologize for not being there. They sat on the edge of the comfortable, worn-out sofa. And my father opened the portfolio. Look, Naomi, he said, shifting into his financial advisor tone. Your mother and I are restructuring the brand. It's a very exciting opportunity. But we need a little more liquid capital to make it happen. My mother jumped in, her lifestyle blogger smile plastered on. We just need you to be a team player. Honey, it's for the family. She slid a document across the coffee table. My eyes scanned it. It was about my educational trust fund. The one my other grandparents, my mother's parents, had left me. The one I hadn't even touched. I saw the number. $300,000. They wanted to use it as collateral. I just stared at them. They hadn't come to see their daughter who'd just had emergency surgery. They'd come to secure a loan. And that's when I understood. I suddenly remembered a psychology term I'd read once. Transactional narcissism. It's the idea that some people don't see others as human beings. They see them as assets or liabilities. Objects to be used. For them, this wasn't a family. It was a transaction. I wasn't their daughter. I was a line item on their balance sheet. I was a resource they had neglected to tap. And now that they were in trouble, they were here to collect. Uncle Arthur had quietly advised me to just listen, if they showed up. So I stayed quiet. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just said, I need to think about it. My father's face tightened. The friendly advisor disappeared. Think about what? Naomi. It's a simple signature. I need to read it over. Don't be selfish. Scott snapped, his voice suddenly cold. We don't have time for this. It's obvious your uncle has been poisoning you against us. He looked at Uncle Arthur, who was standing quietly in the kitchen doorway, watching. My father's disdain for him was obvious. This is family business. Arthur, why don't you go? Read a book. My parents left in a silent fury. My father, Scott, looked back at me from the doorway, his face a mask of disappointment. We'll talk when you decide to be part of this family again. Naomi. The door clicked shut, and the silence they left behind was heavy. I felt sick. And it had nothing to do with the surgery. I was cornered, suffocated by their expectations and my own guilt. I picked up my phone. my hands shaking again. And I called my best friend. Chloe. Chloe isn't just my friend, she's my business partner. The organized, practical, no nonsense, half of our freelance operation. I just needed to vent. I needed one person to say, "That's awful." I told her everything. The 2 a.m. text. The portfolio. The $300,000 demand. I was expecting sympathy. I was expecting, "Oh, now. That's terrible." What I got was pure, cold, analytical Chloe. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then silence. "Naomi," she finally said, her voice flat and dangerous. "They want you to sign what? To use the trust fund as collateral. Just for a little while. They said. Send me a picture of that document," she commanded. "Right now. Do not sign it. Do not text them. Do not talk to them again until I call you back." I was so startled by her intensity that I just said, "Okay." And did it. I sent her the photos. An hour later, my phone rang. It wasn't Chloe. It was a man I'd never met. A financial lawyer from a firm downtown. Chloe had, without hesitation, escalated. The conflict was ripped out of the cozy, dusty living room and thrown into the sterile world of legal retainers and fiduciary duty. This is no longer a family drama. "Naomi," Chloe told me on a separate call. Her voice firm. "This is a preemptive defense. You don't ask a person recovering from surgery to sign away $300,000 unless you are desperate. And desperate people are dangerous." Uncle Arthur agreed. He went into his study and returned with a thick, worn accordion file. It was filled with all the original paperwork from my grandparents. The original will. The trust's charter. "Your grandmother," he said, handing me the file, "was a very smart woman. She didn't trust your father with money even then." We sent everything to the lawyer. The game had changed. I wasn't just the invisible asset anymore. I was an opponent. The lawyer called back 2 days later. His voice wasn't the calm, reassuring tone of a financial advisor. It was serious. Clipped. And cold. "Miss Naomi," he started. And I knew immediately this was bad. "I've reviewed the trust charter from your grandparents. What your parents are asking you to do using an educational trust as collateral for a private business venture is not just ill-advised. It's a significant breach of the trust's terms. It's illegal. We can shut that down easily." I felt a rush of relief. So strong it made me dizzy. So I just... "Tell them no. That's the simple part," he said. And the relief vanished. Replaced by ice. While I was doing my due diligence, I ran a standard credit check on you, just to see what your financial exposure might be. And I found something. I waited. The silence in Uncle Arthur's living room was absolute. There is a high-interest business loan, taken out 5 years ago. In your name. The amount is $50,000. I couldn't speak. "What?" "No. That's impossible. I would know if I had a $50,000 loan." "Would you?" the lawyer asked gently. "It was taken out using your social security number. The signature on the document." "Miss Naomi, it doesn't look much like your signature on the other papers you sent me. It looks, frankly, like your father's handwriting." I felt the blood drain from my face. $50,000. 5 years ago. That was right when my father's brand started to fail. Before my mother rebranded as a lifestyle blogger. The lawyer continued. His voice clinical. "The final balloon payment is due in 3 months. If it default, the creditors come after you. Not him. Your credit. Your assets." The room started to spin. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. The $300,000. I whispered, my voice barely audible. Exactly, the lawyer said. They aren't trying to save their business. They're trying to pay off the $50,000 loan they illegally took out in your name. Before you found out about it, they're trying to use your money to cover up a crime. The betrayal wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just entitlement. This was theft. This was identity fraud. My parents hadn't just abandoned me at the hospital. They had been robbing me. Slowly and silently. For years. The daughter they ignored. The invisible asset. He was just a bank account they thought they could dip into whenever they wanted. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene. And I wasn't just a victim. I was the evidence. The confrontation was set for the following week. In the one place I felt safe, Uncle Arthur's dusty living room. My parents, Scott and Karen, arrived exactly on time. Not looking apologetic, but angry, impatient. They were here to collect a signature, not to have a conversation. We don't have time for this. Naomi, my father, Scott, started before he was even fully in the room. He was already opening his leather portfolio. We need that signature. Or our timelines are ruined. I was sitting on the old, comfortable sofa. I'd been practicing this moment. I looked at him. Not with the hurt of a daughter, but with the cold, flat stare of a creditor. I know, I said, my voice calm and low. About the $50,000 loan. The words hit the air and hung there. Heavy and toxic. Everything stopped. My father's hand froze on his portfolio. My mother's bright, brittle blogger smile wavered. Then completely shattered. What? My mother, Karen, stammered, her hand flying to her throat. What are you talking about? The loan you took out in my name. 5 years ago. The one you were going to pay off with my trust fund. My father's face, usually so composed and advisory, turned a dark, mottled red. He didn't look at me. He looked past me. At my uncle, who was standing quietly by the bookshelf. You, Scott roared, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur. You did this. You've been poisoning her, turning our own daughter against us. This has nothing to do with him, I said, my voice cutting through his rage. But our brand, Karen finally wailed, and the sound was awful. The perfect lifestyle mask was gone, and beneath it was just raw. Disperate greed. We'll lose everything. Our followers. The webinar. Scott, do something. That's when he stepped out. I said, just as a man in a sharp suit emerged from my uncle's study, where he'd been listening. It was the lawyer Chloe had hired. Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Scott, the lawyer said, his voice polite but absolute. My client, Miss Naomi, has instructed me to inform you of a few things. My parents looked at him, confused, as if he were an alien who had just beamed into the room. First, the lawyer continued, the trust your grandparents established has been immediately and indefinitely frozen, pending a full investigation. Your access, as of an hour ago, has been revoked. My father looked like he'd been punched. Second, we have a copy of the original loan application for $50,000. Along with a certified handwriting analysis, comparing the forged signature to your other financial documents. He placed a thin folder on the coffee table. This is, as you know, a felony, identity theft. My mother let out a small, strangled sob and collapsed onto their expensive, useless leather portfolio. My father just stared at the folder, his face pale and slick with sweat. Karen looked up at me, her eyes streaming mascara. Naomi. Honey, please. You can't. We're your family. I looked at her. At the woman who thought a webinar was more important than her daughter's life. At the man who had used my name to commit a crime. I stood up. I felt calm. I felt nothing. Nothing but the cold, clean relief of a long overdue amputation. That, I said, looking down at them both, is not my problem anymore. 3 months later, I was signing a different set of papers. It was a new client contract. A big one. For my own graphic design business. I signed it on the new desk in my new, bright studio apartment. A place I'd paid for with the first legal withdrawal from my own trust fund. Chloe, my friend, and now my official business manager, clinked her coffee mug against mine. To us, she said, smiling. The legal battle had been swift and brutal. Faced with criminal charges, my parents hadn't fought. They'd signed everything. Their brand was dead, buried under a mountain of debt and a looming fraud investigation. They'd declared bankruptcy. I heard they'd had to sell the cold, white, smart home. My studio was filled with sunlight and the smell of old books. Uncle Arthur had helped me move. Half of his library seemed to be in my new living room. He walked in, carrying 2 cups of tea, just as he had every day of my recovery. He set one down on my desk, his eyes smiling. I looked at him. This man who had shown up at 2 a.m, who had asked for nothing and given everything. And I thought about the people who were supposed to love me. I realized I'd spent a lifetime learning a simple, painful truth. Family isn't always the people you share blood with. Family is the people who show up. Family is the people who protect you, not the people you need protection from. And I realized that sometimes, to find yourself, to build a life that is truly your own, you have to have the courage to let go of the people who were supposed to be your blood. You have to be willing to cut the tie, to close the account, and to walk away. Not in anger, but in peace. I took a sip of the tea. I smiled at my uncle, and for the first time, I felt completely, unshakably free.